So if you could wrap up those undoubtedly intriguing conversations and give us your attention, I would like to introduce the gentleman of the evening, a fellow who is no stranger to the Magic Castle or the Magic World, as we'll be discussing, but as is also evidenced by how many of you have come out to see him this evening. To try and list this one individual's credits would take a very long time, which is why we're going to do it during the interview. And we're going to fill that up with not only a lot of information, hopefully some of which will be news to you, surprising things about some of this gentleman's accomplishments, but also we're going to talk about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff and some of the ideas that have informed his campaigns and crusades. Shall we use that term lightly? So without further ado, would you please welcome a gentleman who truly does deserve the moniker amazing, James Randi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Max.
How are you, sir?
Thank
We
you.
would like you.
This is me? Thank you. Thank you. I don't think I need it, or do I?
No, we have two mics. One is for the cameras.
Okay.
This is so they can hear us.
You got me.
So if you have something that you would like the cameras to hear, but not them, do that.
Okay. Or this, yeah, whatever.
Very good to see you.
They never work with me. The batteries run out. Yeah, thank you, Max. I haven't seen you. How many years has
It's
it
been
now?
a bunch. I don't remember how many,
Yeah,
but
there
it's
you
got to
go.
be 5 years, 6, 7.
Oh,
something
we were
like
both
that, at
younger,
least
too.
Well, you barely change.
Yes.
I was looking at some photographs of you from the 1950s. You have changed since then.
That's true.
But you hit a certain point, back
Yep.
around, I think, 1974, and you look exactly the same then as now. I don't know if this is evidence of, well, what is it evidence of?
Let me tell you a bit of a story in that. Now, you didn't ask, but I'm going to volunteer this. I work for colleges and universities all over the world, and I love the work. Now, when I'm doing that, I'm not doing a magic show. I do some mentalism during it in order to show my audience how the so-called psychics work. It's an illustration of how they do their thing. I don't give away any of your material because it's impossible to do that. And this is a strange thing, and it'll just show you how we're going downhill in some respects. I used to use the line, people talk to me after these shows, and they often comment, you know, you don't seem to be getting any older at all. You look about the same as you did about 30 years ago. And I would look at them and say, yes, that's true, but I have a painting in my attic. I don't use that line anymore because they don't laugh. They don't know what I'm referring to. And I look over the audience, and I've given it up quite some time ago, and I look over the audience hoping I'll find a teacher of English literature, perhaps, in there. And I say, Dorian? Gray? Nothing. Okay, moving right along. But I don't use that line any longer. Can you believe it? That there's a generation. Now, when I get a generation where I mention Johnny Carson and they say, who? I know I'm in deep trouble, but I hope I live that long.
Well, the fact that so many people here obviously did get the Dorian Gray reference indicates that we have both a literate audience and an old audience.
What's wrong with being old? There's nothing wrong with it, right,
Nothing
guys?
at all.
Yeah.
In fact, correct me if I am wrong, Sarah, but I believe you at this moment are 82.
That's water.
They told me. Hold on. Is it 82, correct?
I am 82,
82
as
years
of
old.
August the 7th, yes. And going strong, still at it.
Now, I want to turn the clock back a little bit. I don't really want to run through a kind of chronological biography. First of all, because we'd be here till tomorrow morning.
Very true.
But second of all, a lot of your accomplishments are well known. But I want to just take a moment to talk about the very early days. What got you started in magic as a kid? what got you involved in certain specific fields of magic, and what led to your getting arrested for busting up a church meeting. And this is all early stuff, and then we can come to more recent events.
About the age of 11, we can start off again, yes. Well, just a very brief background, not going to go into great detail on this. I was one of those child prodigy things, and it was a seriously, very unhappy time of my life because I didn't have a peer group. I was mixing with kids that were 6 and 8 years older than I was, and were already in school and in high school and such. But I got a special pass from this was in Toronto, Canada. Actually, if you're from Toronto, you have to say Trana. T-R-A-N-N-A, you see, that's the way they say it. If they don't spell it that way, that's their fault. I had a special pass, a little card that I carried with me. It was apparently very seldom issued, but it was a truancy pass to show to truancy officers if I was found on a bus or a streetcar somewhere, or perhaps in a theater even. Ooh, perish the thought. When I was supposed to be in school. And I lost that only about 7 or 8 years ago. What a pity. That was a great souvenir, because I'd like to whip it out of my wallet and say, I'm legal. See? But being a child prodigy like that, again, was not a happy time of my life. But I got a lot of free time. I used to hang out around the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and also at the Toronto Public Library. And I got to go to Wednesday afternoon matinees. And it cost 14 cents in those days. Can you imagine? Whew. That was hard to come up with that 14 cents. And I went there one time when a man named Harry Blackstone was featured. I had never seen a magician before. And seeing Harry I'm speaking senior now, of course. Seeing Harry Blackstone and watching him stand there on the stage with Princess Asra rising in the air, and then pausing and turning to the audience and saying, he had a lisp, as you probably know. You see this young lady suspended in the air between heaven and earth. She could stay there, should I so desire, for 1,000 years and a day. But in the interest of time and in your patience, I will return her to the couch from which she rose only a moment ago. Princess? And the music would start up, and she would come back down, and in the second balcony, that was 14 cents. I was totally captivated. I thought, damn, there's got to be a reason for this. Could it be hypnosis, secret drugs in the drinking water, or what is it? Or, damn, maybe it's a trick. And I decided that was probably it. And I set out to find out how it was done. My first step was to walk outside the theater at the end of the show, all the way around the back, and finding Harry Blackstone with his wing collar open, no air conditioning in those days, and fanning himself like crazy. And he came over to me and he said, yes, young man, what can I do for you? I said, well, I'm sort of interested in what you do here. He took me backstage, this lovely old gentleman, among the equipment, and into the dressing room, took a poster, the one that you see here in the castle, on the main floor, the one with the levitated camel. Very, very famous poster, worth a fortune these days, I'm sure. And he signed it to Randall, that's my original first name, and he signed it Harry Blackstone, rolled it up. He taught me the paddle move. Most of us know what that is, right? You don't know? Oh, too bad. A deep secret that I can't share with you, I'm sorry. The paddle move, I did that for the next 6 weeks, I swear. I'm still pretty good at it. And I took the poster, got onto the tram, rode up to Leaside, where I lived at the time, the north end of Toronto, got on the bus, transferred over to the bus, got home, walked in the door, very, very late, and my mother was very annoyed at me, and I looked, and I didn't have the poster. Someplace in a bus in Toronto, Canada, there is a poster riding around in the back seat with my name on it, signed by Harry Blackstone. Yes, I never saw that poster again. I was devastated, but it had its reward, because every year after that, Harry Blackstone came at about the same time in the autumn to the Casino Theatre in Toronto, Canada. We would receive 4 tickets at my home in the mail, and we went every year to see that gentleman. Oh my goodness, Harry Blackstone Sr. I got to know Junior eventually too for many years, but Sr. had won my heart, and he was the one who was responsible for getting me into the magic trade. I joined the Hat and Rabbit Club in Toronto, Canada.
Still active?
Oh yes, the IBM group there. And in fact, we formed our own club. Yes, that was, what was it called? The, oh goodness, all right. Memory is failing me at the moment. It'll come to me in about 20 minutes and I'll yell it out.
Okay, if you suddenly blurt out the name of the magic
you'll know what that is.
We'll
okay?
connect it
You're
back to
prepared for
this.
that? All right. And yeah, we formed our own little group there, and a junior member. Most of us weren't old enough to join the Hat and Rabbit Club. That was very distinguished. Only people this high. You know, I was this high, and I still am, as a matter of fact.
Now, at what point, obviously you started with the paddle trick, watching illusion shows, that suggests an eclectic interest, but you began to specialize at a fairly young age in a couple of very narrowly defined areas of magic.
Yep. I specialized in mentalism, and you're familiar with the art, I believe.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. I'll bet. Yes, I started out as a mentalist, and I soon found that I could make very big money at kids' birthday parties and such, as many as $5 at a shot. Wow. And that was very good for a kid my age. But again, remember that I was on this list of kids that didn't have to go to school. I went, at the age of 17, I went to high school because I had to develop a peer group. I hadn't mixed with kids. I didn't know one kid from the other and didn't have any close friends in that direction. But I was well into magic by that time, and I discovered mentalism along the way when I saw a gentleman a little later named Chan Canasta. You may know the name Chan Canasta. Some of you will, and of course you would know. And he did a book test. Damn, that was a book test. As a matter of fact, but I must tell you, Chan is no longer with us.
Correct.
Very true.
Not that many years ago, but...
All right. Well, when I saw Chan Canasta do the book test, I didn't figure it out the first time, but I went to see a second show later on the day, and I figured out, that's pretty damn clever. Wow. And I developed my own little version of it over the years. Anyone who would like to see me do it, we go to the Magic Library, which is not too far from where I sit at this very moment. We may select a couple of books off the shelf there, and I may demonstrate for you if you'd like to see it. My own particular version of it.
That could be arranged.
All right. But that was the first thing that I practiced. I actually got paid $75 a week at a local nightclub doing table work from one table to the other.
And you were at what age at this point?
I was 17, I guess.
17?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't drink, but you could do card tricks?
In Canada, we drank since we were 8.
Oh, sorry.
None of this limitation. Canada, we're real guys, you know. Hey, give me another one of them. Yeah. Oh no, that was my introduction to performing in public and everything, and it served me well, I believe.
All right. Now, where does busting up the church come in? Because this is still pretty early.
Oh yeah, that was way back when. Now, I was very curious about the spiritualists and minders and such that were coming to town, and there was one fellow named Little David. I won't get into the story of Little David, that would take far too long to tell. But there were a couple of them that were holding out at local churches, and my good friend Terence Kingsley Lawson, just recently deceased, my boyhood chum, he was into magic, before I was, as a matter of fact, and I worked as his assistant for some time. He drove a Studebaker. That's heavy, you have no idea that he could actually drive it himself. Wow. And he drove me around, and we had a wonderful time. I learned a great deal about meeting crowds and falling on your face and everything, because he did that, and I did that from time to time. But, Terence Kingsley Lawson came to me and informed me that there was a spirit church on Queen Street West that was operating, and he had been in there and had been amused by what he saw. Now, what was happening is the fellow in there was doing the one-ahead method. I think I need not describe that in detail to this august group. And it was very simple. It was very obvious what was happening. And I chose to, first of all, I put a question in saying, is Petey in heaven? Petey was my parakeet, but I didn't mention that. And apparently he was, and he had all kinds of friends that he had met in school, you see, that are in heaven now. So I didn't know that I ever sent the parakeet to school, and I had no memory of it whatsoever if that's what happened. But when that question was answered, I stood up and I marched forward, looked in the trash basket, and came out with the letters and described very briefly the one-ahead method to this congregation who was sitting there, very annoyed at what I was trying to do, because they just wanted to hear the answer to their question. And which was not coming from the spirit world, I might mention, in passing. And they called the cops. They were right across the street on Queen Street, the Queen Street West station. I remember it firmly. My father, this was a Sunday, and my father was out on the golf course someplace, and maybe in the middle of a putt, they came rushing up to him and said, call your home, your son has been arrested. And they had simply taken me across the street. The cops were very understanding, and they called my father, and they just let me sit on a bench in one of the cells. They didn't close the cell door or anything like that. Drat. That would have been a great combo, don't you think? But nonetheless, my father had to come and get me, and that was not a happy evening for me. My father had to break up his golf game and to come and get me and trot me home, and gave me quite a talking to. So that was how I broke up a religious meeting, and I plead guilty as charged, Your Honor.
And so the seeds of the future were sown.
Yeah, sown, yes.
But check this out for a transition. You were put in jail and managed to escape through the good graces of your dad.
Yes, yes.
But it wasn't too much after that you started escaping from jail cells through other means.
Well, I had always been curious about locks, wanted to see how they worked. Took a lot of them apart and didn't solve it, because somewhere along the line of taking apart a pin tumbler lock, I'd hear spring. Something had taken off and landed across the room. But I eventually solved the thing, and I got pretty good at picking those locks, and I still have a bit of a touch for it if you want to challenge me sometime. But I pin tumbler locks and lever locks were relatively easy if you had the right tools, and I found out how to make the right tools. So I took up the business of being an escape artist, but I took it up, just learning locks, it was one thing. I didn't want to do it seriously. But in Quebec City, 1 year, much later, I was working at a nightclub there, and I noticed two plug ugly guys sitting at a side table, nursing beers, and I didn't pay much attention to them, but they were there for the second show too, looking at me very carefully. I was doing rope escapes and a few things like that, and a Siberian chain escape. I had a really good version of it. And I was called over after the second show. There were 3 shows a night, and I was called over after the second show, and they sat me down, and they said, can you escape from these? And out came a pair of handcuffs. Now, handcuffs are relatively simple locks. They're simple lever locks. Anything you can get into the keyhole you can use to open them. Generally speaking, that's not with every pair of handcuffs, not by any means, as I subsequently found out on a couple of strange occasions. But we won't get into all those details. But I said, oh yes, I could sure do that. You want to try them? I said, well, see me after the next show. I have one more show to do. And they said, okay, we'll be waiting outside. And I thought, okay. And I thought, well, I'll never see them again. So I did the 3rd show, packed up the props, put them on my arm, went down the stair. I was using a duck at the time, so the duck was whack, whack, whack all the way down the stairs. And ducks grow up very fast. About 6 or 8 days is the most you can get out of them, and then they have to go someplace else. I don't want to get into the details on that either. But then you replace them with a smaller version, you see. But again, I digress. So I walked outside, and there was the squad car. And I thought, oh, geez, I forgot all about this. And they invited me into the squad car, so I handed over all the props and the little bags that I had and such. And I went inside on one side and almost immediately got out the other side with the handcuffs off. And they were quite amazed at that. And then they countered with, could you escape from our jail? I said, well, I'd have to take a look at it. And they bundled me back into the car, and off we went. Got to the jail. Oh, what a cinch. It was really a cinch, guys. If you're interested later, individually, I can tell you the story, how easy it was. But they made it as difficult as they could. They took a pair of handcuffs and they stood me up on a bench and stretched my arms up, and then they put them around the barred window that led to the outside. And so my hands were held in this position with the chain going around. And I thought, well, this is not quite fair. But I managed to get out of it, and I walked out of the jail cell. And there was a reporter there by that time. Apparently not much was happening in town. I was the most exciting thing available. And there have been no earthquakes or hurricanes recently. So the next day, the Quebec Soleil, the Sun that is, came out with an article that said, "L'étonnant Randi s'évade de la prison de Québec." The amazing Randy, I had never used that title before, but the astonishing or the amazing Randy. The astonishing Randy wouldn't be a good title, it's too long on the card anyway. Yeah. So that's the first time anybody ever called me anything like that. He escapes from the jail in Quebec, and they had a short article. And by golly, that was the first article I'd ever gotten in the paper. So I decided to change my name to The Amazing Randy immediately, overnight. And when I got to the club that night, there was a lineup outside. I'd never seen a lineup out there. I thought, oh, this is the lynch mob, I'm not sure. But the manager came rushing over to me, he said, forget the duck and forget the rings and all that crap. He said, do an escape act of some kind where you get out of things. I said, I don't got to do any of that sort of thing. But I got a hold of the local cop there, and he said, oh yeah, we have a straitjacket down at the well, the straitjacket was 18 sizes too big. It almost fell off me. But nonetheless, it was effective enough, and I did an escape act that night, and then all next day I had to slave away to get another act ready that was based on the escape thing. And they held me over 2 weeks, so hey, it was a great victory. There's 2 weeks' pay that I didn't know was coming. But I was doing an escape act all of a sudden. Shortly after that, I was asked to go down to New York to work on a show called was it called It's Magic? I think it was just called It's Magic, with Paul Tripp.
Yes.
Remember Paul Tripp?
The show was called It's Magic. It was on CBS.
That's right. Yeah.
About 56, we're talking.
That's true. And it was done at the Ed Sullivan, what we now know as the Ed Sullivan Theater. And Paul Tripp, the week before, in announcing it at the end of the program, he said, next week we're going to have the amazing Randy here who will escape while fastened in a straitjacket 10 feet, 10 stories above the ground. He tripped up on it. Paul Tripp, get it? Little pun.
I get it.
And that was true. They hauled me up. Oh, Jesus. I was way up there. I've got photographs of it, as a matter of fact. And the Herald Tribune the next day reported that he hung there like a great dead tuna. That was not exactly the phrase I would have used, but they did.
Maybe for the initial part, but
yes,
tuna usually don't get off the hook.
Then a very lively tuna after that, I would say, yes. But yeah, I did the upside-down straitjacket for the first time.
So now we're into the 50s and going into the 60s. You are having great career success, not only in North America, but I know you went over to England.
Oh, yeah.
There are photographs of you suspending a woman in midair or semi in midair on the top of a building.
That was a levitation effect, yes. It wasn't a...
pardon
me, it was a suspension, I'm sorry. A suspension, no.
A
suspension, it was not a levitation, it was a suspension. It was the... Abbott made it. Well, that's all I need to say. Yes.
But the point is you had a thriving career in nightclubs and television, theaters, all sorts of things. You even passed through a phase and I'm not sure I should really bring this up in public, but where you played a magic clown on television.
Yes, yes. And as a matter of fact, I just recently came upon actual film, 16 millimeter
I've seen
film.
some clips.
Yeah, and I'm having to find a place, it's rather faded, that will make good video out of that I can put on DVD, because some folks would like to see it, I'm sure. Yeah, I was called by Tico Bonomo, Bonomo's Turkish Taffy. Do you remember that? B-O-N-O-M-O, Bonomo, Turkish Taffy. And it was very, very popular confection in the stores at that time. And he did a program called The Magic Clown. And, so many different magicians. Anyone who came to New York City would do the Magic Clown for about 2 or 3 weeks, because it was such heavy makeup you didn't know who it was, and you didn't care. But you'd always see the next Magic Clown in Tannen's Magic Shop buying every trick he could find and learning it right there in the shop so that he could do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you see. But that was always a comic thing. We'd go in there to see the Magic Clown shopping for his tricks. But Tico Bonomo, after the Magic Clown series was finished, gave me a call, and he asked me to go to Washington, D.C., where he was opening a chain of restaurants called Foodini's. Spare me, spare me. But it was a hell of a nice restaurant. It was really very good. And they had canvas-back chairs with Blackstone Thurston and all these different magicians named on them. And I ended up managing the shows for him. Can I tell you a Bobby Baxter story?
Anybody here remember Bobby Baxter? He was mostly known on the East Coast, but he just died recently, one of the great comedy magicians of all time. Wonderful.
Oh, yes, but with a weakness. And that weakness took place when we put him on stage. Now, we needed 7 minutes out of the artist. The little curtain on a little round stage, an arced stage there, would go up, and good evening, and the diners were there. They wanted to turn those tables over, you see. They wanted fresh customers in there. They didn't want to do a half-hour show because they'd freeze at the tables, not buy any more groceries. So 7 minutes was the absolute limit. And Alan Nguyen, now known as Alain
New.
Alain New. I'm very sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was his first gig ever that he worked at Foodini's, and he'll be glad to admit that to you. But he did very well. I saw he had genius, real genius, and a great personality. But there were all kinds of wonderful artists that worked there. But they had to do 7 minutes, and Bobby didn't have much work at the time. He was in New York, sort of feeling sorry for himself, and rightly so. And I was in Washington, so I gave him a call. I said, come on down, we'll do a few weeks. Oh, he was very grateful to have it. He got down there, and I told him the 7 minute thing. He said, well, I can't really do anything in 7 minutes. I said, Bobby, that's the rule. We have to do it in 7 minutes. Management is very heavy on this. He went out there and he did 20 minutes, the very first show. We had to ring down the curtain on him. And he told me backstage, he said, but they were still laughing. He couldn't understand how you could possibly bring down the curtain on anybody where the audience was still laughing. But he didn't understand this basic fact of 7 minutes.
Bobby was one of these performers who, the secret, it's too late now, but the secret to getting Bobby to stick to 7 minutes is to tell him he's only got 3 minutes.
See, I didn't know that.
And then you'll get your 7.
You should have been around, Max. You would have helped me.
Sorry, I wasn't there to advise.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. But we eventually just had to dismiss him after the first 2 weeks, unfortunately, because he would not stop. He got carried away. His blood would race and his pulse would rise, I'm sure. I never tested it, but I'm sure that's what happened. But Bobby he was a great artist, wasn't he?
Tremendous.
Oh,
tremendous.
He had the audience on the floor. We didn't want them on the floor. We wanted them at the door. But nonetheless,
well, you just handed me another effortless segue.
Okay.
Because you just talked about blood boiling, getting angry and upset, and this leads us to a different aspect of your career, because it's quite clear that had you so desired, you could have continued performing in nightclubs and theaters and TV, and you were doing radio and all sorts of different things. You could have continued purely as an entertainer and had a very thriving career.
Oh, yeah. But
you didn't. You moved into a different position, which hails back to that early seance busting event, but this now we're talking really leading into the 70s, where you became known, far better known, in fact, despite all the success you had had as a magician and an escape artist, and for that matter, an illusionist and a hypnotist, and all the other things you had done. You became best known as the arch skeptic.
Yes.
And it is, ever since then, that is, when your name comes up, that's the first thing people think of, or maybe vice versa. When the term skepticism comes up, you're probably the first thing most people think of.
I sure as hell hope so. Yes.
So let's go there.
Okay.
Was there, obviously you had an attitude toward this early on, because we talked about your experience with the church seance when you were still a teenager. Was there an event in adulthood that made you decide this was more than an occasional thing, this was really something you wanted to pursue?
Well, I thought I would probably retire from the escape business, which is pretty strenuous. You know, hanging in straitjackets over Niagara Falls is something you can do for a certain number of years, and then you get a wee bit tired of it. And I got tired of looking at the world upside down, you know. And I determined that probably at the age of 60 I would retire from the escape business. And I had been receiving increasing inquiries from people about certain psychic, so-called psychic, when I say it, it's always in quotes, okay? These performers who were claiming they had genuine supernatural powers. I would get questions from people, and I would say, no, I believe not. I think this is what he's using and such, and they'd say, oh yeah, but I wasn't very convincing, I guess, because people who want to believe these things will believe them no matter what evidence you give them, short of a confession, and even then they say, it's too bad he had to confess and lie like that, you know. That's what they did with the Fox sisters when they came out in public and admitted what they did as spiritualists and such. The audience booed them and went out right on believing. They said, oh, isn't it dreadful that they do this kind of thing, confessing for money? No, they made fortunes doing what they did, lying to the audience. And anyway, that was something I'd always wanted to do, and at the age of 60, I finally decided to hang up my straitjacket, so to speak. That's a little expression that we use in the business. It's hard to hang up, too. Have you ever thought of what it'd be like to take your straitjacket to the laundry? I did that occasionally. And you know, there was always a crowd waiting for me the following day when I came by to pick it up. They wanted to see who the guy was who had a pet chimpanzee. They weren't too sure why those long arms and the straps and such. But I was a bit of a circus act at the time, I guess, just getting my straitjacket laundered. Anyway, yes, I had received these questions, and I had had many teary-eyed people come to me and give me the story, as they do at the James Randi Educational Foundation even today. I've had families come by and individuals and just pairs, like married couples will come by and sit in the library, and I give them a little confidential bit of advice, and they will say things to me like, well, our mother has the control of the family money, and she's given most of it away. All the CDs has been cashed in and such to a faith healer or a psychic of some kind who is pretending to put her in touch with her deceased husband. And what can we do? And unfortunately, my answer has to be very disappointing. If I could help, I certainly would, gleefully, energetically. I would go all the way. But there's not really much you can do with a convinced believer who has already given a great deal of money to somebody like that, one of these charlatans, for the promise of being put in touch with loved ones, for example. And that's what made me decide that when I reached the age of 60, I would probably branch off into that aspect. And it was a huge success for me. I started to do lectures at colleges and universities, again, all over the world. I've traveled the globe, every country except, well, Greenland I've never touched. Iceland I just did for the first time a few weeks ago. Wonderful place. Go. Wonderful thing. There's more than ice there, believe me. But charming people and a very, very beautiful country. I get 25 cents every time I say this in front of an audience. And ching, I just heard that. That used to be a cash register, you see, when we said that people don't have those anymore. You never heard of Johnny Carson? Yeah. Anyway, I took into doing these lectures, and as I say, I've done them all over the world with a great deal of success. And my audience is not always all that friendly. I sometimes get a very grumpy set in the front row. They always come. Ordinary audiences never sit in the front row.
Is smiling.
Yeah, but this is an exceptional audience.
They're either not grumpy or they're stealth grumpy.
Yeah, stealth grumpy. Write that down. I like that. I decided to do that, and I turned out my first book was The Magic of Uri Geller, now known as The Truth About Uri Geller, and somewhat expanded. And no plans to rewrite that or to bring it up to date because Mr. Geller is now seeking his successor. Yeah, sure. All over the world, if he can possibly get the gig. But my second one was Flim Flam. That was highly successful for me. It's still in print. In fact, all of my books except one are still in print.
The one that isn't in print, is it because of lack of interest or because there were some issues about its propriety?
No, it's a very limited book because it was published in connection with the series I did for Granada TV in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
And it was issued congruent with, constrained with, in connection with, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, concurrently with the Granada TV series. And it sold every copy that I know of. I still have one in the library, and that's it. But it was never reprinted, and it dealt more or less with the contents of the series.
Yeah, it was an overview of the series, which, by the by, two of the producers working on that show would be known to many people in this audience, one being Frankie Glass, who is now married to Jim Steinmeier, and she is a television producer of
what a combination that is.
Great renown, she really is. The other being David Britland was involved with that series. David, of course, has been very involved with various Magic on Television projects.
Indeed, yes. I had fun doing that. Granada was wonderful to me, though. Really, the only reason we didn't repeat the series was the bottom line, and the thing was we never awarded the $10,000 prize. It was $10,000 prize in those days. We never awarded the prize. There's no point in it then.
But someone just before this talk began, someone in the audience said to me, is Randy still giving out that $10,000 prize? And I said, well, you're not giving it out, but I said it's no longer $10,000. It is now $1 million.
Yeah.
It has been for some years now.
Oh yes, for quite some years. A gentleman showed up who obviously could afford it, handed me a check at the door as he was leaving. He said, oh, this is to make your challenge a little more interesting, and handed me a check for $1 million. I got to tell you this too. I'm sure I haven't told you this, Max, but I think you'll find it amusing. The check was a small size check, not one of your big ones, and it had actually printed on the check all the way around the border, this check not good for more than $1 million. This check not good for... I've never had to put that on my checks, Max, just in case the bank would wonder.
Just to be sure.
Yeah, just to be sure. But boy, when you take that over to the bank and you lay it down, you say, I want to deposit this check, the teller always looks at you with hooded eyelid, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a real check.
Speaking of the $1 million challenge, brings me, we're jumping around chronologically at this point, but you were involved early on in your skeptical efforts with the founding of a group called SciCop, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. And there are other groups as well. Michael Shermer is sitting somewhere over in this side.
Right over there. There he is.
Who runs the magazine Skeptic. And with it, a variety of events and lectures and so forth.
Oh, yeah.
But you eventually formed your own group, the James Randi Educational Foundation, or JREF, the new president of which is somewhere in the back.
Where are you, DJ? There he is, right there. With his little hand up there.
But in this sort of reconstituting of JREF, with a new president and making some changes in the structure and all of this, someone new has been brought in to be specifically in charge of keeping tabs on protocol should someone try for that $1 million prize.
Yes.
And it is a person who is known to pretty much everyone here.
Moi?
No.
No, there are several people
Haven't
in
you
charge
asked
of protocol.
Banachek to be the sort of...
Oh, yes, Banachek. Oh, yeah, no.
Overseer of that
Banachek
prize?
handles it from a slightly different angle, though.
Okay.
Yeah. We get together and we discuss protocol because he interviews them and finds out all the little things that they require, you know.
Right.
I need to be seated next to a right-handed person or something like that. They all have strange things that they need, you know. The vibrations, right, have got to be just right. And you've got to be careful of that. No negative vibrations. As a matter of fact, just to break away for 1 second, when I do the challenge, I always tell people now, and I don't do the challenge. I don't involve myself in it because they all say that I put out evil vibrations. You see. No, they do. Well, that's the very common claim they make. That's what the homeopaths even said after we had a test with the Royal Society and the BBC, that I had put out negative vibrations. So I always tell them all now, don't tell me when the test is taking place. Do it, and then 48 hours after it's been done and summed up and put in the computer and onto paper and signed off on, then tell me we did it, you see, so that I can't. Of course, they say that I can go back in time and do the same thing. They have to come up with some sort of excuse as to why their favorite theory failed.
All right, let me toss out this question.
Yes.
You've been offering versions of this prize for many years, and no one thus far has collected. But I'm using the phrase thus far. My question is this: do you think it's possible, I'm not asking if it's probable or likely, do you think it's possible that someone could come along and do something that absolutely you would say, I've got to give them the $1 million?
Well, first of all, understand that there are two phases to the $1 million challenge. First phase is what we call the preliminary phase, and we arrange odds of success by chance alone to be about 1 in 1,000. Because if you can play the violin, you can play the violin. You either can or you can't. It should be possible to prove it. But no one has ever passed the preliminary test. The second one would be the formal test, in which odds would have to be much higher, because there is the chance that a fluke would occur where they would attain a winning score, and those things are all very carefully delineated. Mm-hmm. There never has to be any discussion as to whether or not they won the preliminary test in this case, right. Because it's there. You either did it or you didn't do it, and you don't have to judge it. You don't have to make a decision on the thing. But yes, there is a chance that could be done. It's a very small chance, because beating 1 in 1,000 odds first to become eligible, and then beating 1 in 1 million odds, that's 1 in 1 billion. You see?
Well, but on the other hand,
yeah.
Someone has to win the Irish sweepstakes.
Yeah, exactly. If you go long enough, if there are enough people. But you would think that right now, outside the Magic Castle, there would be lineups of people knocking on the door wanting to be let in so they could do the challenge.
In fact, there may be, but we have a dress code.
Yeah, they're usually dressed in sackcloth or robot costumes or something.
But the question I asked kind of has two different answers. One is it possible that someone could win the $1 million by just luck alone? Because, or is it possible?
Oh, yes.
I mean, do you think that it's possible that at some point someone shows up and says, I can douse for water, let's say, and you say, I don't believe you, and they say, okay, set up a test, and they hit whatever the
requirements are, yeah. Whatever the protocol says, yes. So it is possible. The chances are very small, and hey, I'm 82. I think I'll outlive it.
But my question, but again, I'm not talking here purely in terms of chances, in terms of mathematics. I'm talking about, do you feel it's conceivable? I'm not asking you to say it's likely or that you expect it, but do you think that it is possible that somewhere there is someone who has, for example, a dowsing ability?
Oh, yeah.
A rare ability that is so little seen that we've never seen it, and yet they have an actual ability that warrants giving them the prize. Do you consider that a possibility, or or
Absolutely.
not?
It's a possibility. I can't see the chance of it ever happening because I don't see any motives whereby such a thing could work. But let me go back a bit in time.
Okay.
I was on a radio program in New York City. I've forgotten the name of the program now, with Stanley Krippner, a very noted parapsychologist, and I'm sure you know, and a very honorable gentleman. I think he's dead wrong in the conclusions he comes to, but he dedicated his life to it, and okay, thank you, Stanley, as long as you're honest. And with another fellow whose name escapes me altogether, and I think it was Stanley who suggested, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Oh, I took that challenge. I said, yeah, all right, I'll give $1,000 to anyone who can actually do what they say they can do in a paranormal, occult, or supernatural fashion. And they were sort of a duh at the microphones, and they sort of swallowed, and I sort of swallowed too, because I didn't have $1,000 at that time. But I tried to keep my bank account up to at least $1,000 in order to stay relatively honest and this sort of thing. But I offered that prize right off the top, and that got some attention, and particularly with Stanley Krippner, because he thought, oh, you're going to lose your money, you see. Stanley's still around, and I'm still around, and the money is still around. It's 1.2 million or something like that. DJ, do you know what it is?
1.22, exactly.
Wow, hey, we're making money. Yeah, but that's invested, and we take money off the top of it every now and then for scholarships and various other things. But we keep it at a minimum of $1 million. I had to put in $20,000 of my own money about 3 or 4 years ago when it actually dropped down below $1 million, and they called me, oh, panic, and I put in the $20,000.
That's where the MacArthur grant came in helpful.
Yeah, very happily, yes. But I found money, I found that the market had improved somewhat,
Wow.
and it rose up again, and so whew, I'm safe again. But now the chances are too, though, Max, that someone could come along with some technology.
Right.
Some technology that would find water underground, or I love that. You'll love this, guys. There is one dowsing rod out there, the Quadro rod.
Was this the one that was being sold to the military?
No, it looks exactly the same.
Okay.
There are no working parts under it, so it is exactly the same thing as the ADE 561, I think it is. They just sold in Iraq to find bombs, yeah. And I have I better not say what agency he's with, but he's with an American agency that has some power over there and represents the American government, and he confides into me every now and then. He said he has actually seen with his own eyes them out with the ADE 561 scanning a truck that might have had munitions or something in it, and scanned, part of the car, right? Truck drove on 200 yards down the highway, boom, it blew up and killed some people, as a matter of fact. So that's just a little side story. Now, where was I? Yes, dowsing rods. Somebody may come along with some technology. Oh, I was going to tell you about the Quadro rod. They have chips. They have chips that they put in the side of the dowsing rod thing. It's just a handle like that. It looks like a pistol grip, and it's got a rod sticking out that flops back and forth, and that's supposed to point at the munitions or whatever they're looking for. And one of the chips has the chips have things on them like explosives, oxidizers, various other things. One of them has CDF on the side of it. Coon dog finder. It's specifically designed to find coon dogs. I think it's only sold in Arkansas, that model. I'm not too sure.
Limited use in Iraq.
Yes, indeed. And they have a clip on the side of it into which a Polaroid, remember Polaroid pictures? They don't even know that Polaroid pictures don't exist any longer, but it's the size of a Polaroid picture. So if you have a Polaroid picture of your coon dog, you can put it in the side and it'll point at the coon dog. Yeah, sure. But this is the kind of crazy business that we're in, guys. It's so strange.
Sounds like they were using Ted Serios as a consultant.
Yeah. Or something like that. They don't know Ted Serios.
Too hip for the room. All right.
Yes.
Picture in his closet in the attic.
Yeah.
You said something interesting just a moment ago that I want to call back to. You were talking about Stanley Krippner, and you mentioned that you strongly disagree with his beliefs.
Yes.
But that you're friendly.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there is a perception on the part of a lot of people, particularly because when you are speaking in public, whether it's on a TV show or making a speech at a university or what have you, you're usually railing against the things you're against.
Yeah.
And the notion that you are friendly with people who have very different opinions, I think, may be a surprise to some of the people here.
Yes, it usually is, but all I require is honesty, and Stanley Krippner has never shown me in his writings or in his conversations with me, we've had many of them, that he has ever been dishonest. Now, I'll give you a bit of an anecdote on that same story. The Parapsychological Association is a very large group of parapsychologists all around the world. I consider it a total lost cause, but that's their business. And they had a meeting in New Jersey some years back, quite some years back, and I lived in New Jersey at the time. And I was asked to speak there, and I spoke there to very mild acclaim. And I buttonholed John Beloff from the University of Edinburgh, now deceased. A dear man, and an also very honest parapsychologist. I never knew him to vary from strict truth. And Stanley Krippner, and I invited them to come and have lunch at my home. It was not all that far away. And we sat around, we had lunch, and we had some laughs, and finally I settled back, and I said, okay, I've got a question that I have to ask the two of you. I said, you've both been in this business, now Stanley for 35 years and you for 45 years or whatever, and said that's a long time to spend in this profession, and both of you admit that you've never found a positive, provable case of a paranormal, occult, or supernatural event of any kind. And they nodded at one another and at me. I said, and you still stay in this same business with no positive results to show? Why? And Stanley said to John, he said, John, I'll defer to you. And John leaned forward and he said, yes, I believe I speak for Stanley. Now, this floored me, Max. You can understand why. He looked me straight in the eye, he said, because we're both scientists, and we really honestly believe that there is something to be found there. Well, that set me back on my heels. I was stunned, because he's absolutely right. And for a scientist to suspect that there is something in something he's looking for, Fleming would have thrown away the moldy Petri dish,
Right.
He said, oh, that's only mold. What the hell, no germs growing there. Oh, interesting, boom, throw it away. But he didn't do that. And I had to look at the two of them and say, gentlemen, and reach across the table, shook both their hands quite earnestly, and I meant it absolutely. I said, that's what I call real science. I don't think that parapsychology is a real science because it doesn't have the evidence to support it, except anecdotal evidence, and that's not sufficient. And they both nodded at me and said, yes, that's quite true. I said, but the fact that you're convinced and you're still pursuing it, I have to salute. And think about that now. Think about that seriously.
Yeah.
These are real scientists.
Well, this is clearly evidence of faith.
Absolutely.
In the truest sense.
Absolutely.
Backed up by
Yep.
a genuine attitude of scientific inquiry
Yep.
rather than fun and games.
And I'll give you an example of what followed that, as a matter of fact. Because after I'd had that discussion with them, and after the Alpha Project, it happened actually following the Alpha Project, which we may or may not get into in the time we
Just a
had.
quick comment to bring you up to date. The Alpha Project was two young fellows who were studied by parapsychologists, and after some months in which they produced...
Well, 3 years of
Was it 3 years
intermittent
of
testing. Yeah.
where they produced phenomenal results. They revealed themselves to be proteges of Randi's and that they had faked everything, thus proving that a high-level research facility was easily duped. One of the two, I don't know what happened to the other guy, but one of them is now known as Banijak.
Yeah. Well, the other fellow, Mike Edwards, came by to visit me at the foundation, and wonderful reunion. And he came to our annual conference, as a matter of fact. Very nice, but two really nice guys. Now, where was I?
All right, that was
Yeah,
Project Alpha.
Yeah, that was
So,
Project Alpha, yes.
Around the same time
Yeah.
as Project Alpha.
Yes, oh, okay. Now, what was I forgot what I was heading for there now. Project Alpha,
Scientific inquiry.
yeah, what?
You were talking about Krippner and Beloff.
Yes,
Stating that they
Yes, yes.
legitimately believed there was something to be found.
and kudos to them.
But were scientists first and foremost, so they were not leaping to results that they hadn't proved.
Yes, very true. And they said because they thought there was something there, and that's why they pursued it. What was the, oh, damn, it's hard. This is the results of
It's my
chemotherapy.
fault I
folks.
explained what Project Alpha was.
Yeah, I am just coming out of chemotherapy by 6 months, and I do have some recollection problems. I apologize for it, but it'll pop back into
At
my
least
head.
you have a good excuse for your short-term memory issues.
Yeah, there you go.
I just have to say, well, I forgot.
Yes, so anyway, yeah, let's leave that, and it'll
All right.
suddenly occur to me, and I'll blurt it out.
Let's take a slight tangent leap.
Okay.
then. Faith. There exists faith. We can certainly agree, even if what is having, if a person has faith in something, that doesn't prove that the thing they have faith in exists, but the faith exists.
Oh, yes.
And we saw that in the case of the two scientists you were just talking about. One of our dear friends just died recently, and that's Martin Gardner,
Ah, yes.
who just passed away at the age of 95 with a remarkably productive
Full of
life.
honor, and 20 minutes before he died, his son told me he was telling jokes. I want to go that way. Not necessarily at 95, that's too early. But yes.
But Martin never made a big secret out of the fact that he defined himself theologically as a fideist. And what he meant by that, and he wrote explicitly about this, was that although he did not believe in organized religion or any of the elaborate rituals attached to such, he did believe in God of some sort. He didn't
Didn't define it.
He didn't define it as being a guy with a beard who looked like you, as many people imagine. He didn't he didn't anthropomorphize the idea, but he believed in God.
Yeah.
And he did this specifically. I mean, he said, if I could prove it, it wouldn't be faith. Well, how do you respond to that? Because
Yeah.
it's almost, in a way, it's an unwinnable argument.
Yeah, yeah. But Martin explained to me, and this I granted him. He said, I don't have any evidence to support my belief at all. Nothing that would stand up to examination of the barest kind. He said, you've got lots of evidence to support your point of view. He said, I don't have any evidence, not one shred of it. He said, I want to make that very clear. I said, yes. Wondering what he was going to follow that with. He said, but it just makes me feel a little bit better to suspect that there is something up ahead. That's all I need, folks. This man was such a close friend, like my father, I assure you. Martin Gardner, I worship his memory. I don't mourn it, not at all. No, I worship his memory. He was a great, great man. I loved him dearly. And that excuse was enough for me.
Well, that is the type of statement that we don't usually hear from you, because I think most of the time when we hear James Randi in a public forum talking about issues of belief systems that don't stand up to scrutiny, that cannot be proven, you tend to be adversarial.
Oh, yes. But if you have a good enough excuse, like being Krippner or Beloff or Gardner, I certainly accept it. I don't make fun ever of the people that try to accept our challenge, who express beliefs that are quite contrary to what I expect reality insists of. I don't make fun of them at all, because in most cases they believe they have good reason for their beliefs, and that's all I can possibly ask of them. They don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to prove anything to me at all. And incidentally, you referred to me. You did not refer to me by the term that so many people do, which is debunker. And I know why, because you understand, as I do, that if I refer to myself as a debunker, that would it would infer very strongly that I am going into this confrontation, to this examination, this whatever, investigation of a psychic claim, saying, this is not so, and I'm going to prove that it's not so. I don't know that it's not so. it's possible it is so. I've got to be prepared for that eventuality, that possibility. Again, I doubt it very, very strongly, but I've got to be prepared for the possibility that it will be real. And in that case, I can't assume that it is not real. I have to look into it, and after that, I can make my decision and come to the conclusion that the evidence suggests.
There was a case that you were involved in, it's got to be 20 years ago at least, with a fellow who made a claim. Now, it wasn't really, we wouldn't call it a psychic claim, and as far as I know, he never brought up the issue of going for the prize. But when he initially made this claim, you said, nonsense, he's got a gimmick, he's got some secret way of doing this, and then it turned out he really could.
Yep.
And it's not only a great story, which I'll ask you to tell, but it leads us to another question. So tell the story first. I hope we're talking about the same guy.
Does this involve a record?
Yes, it does.
It does indeed. This is in the days before CDs. Not too many of you will recall that.
Black things with grooves.
Yeah. This gentleman, whose name escapes me at the moment, I apologize for that, was an audiophile. In other words, he had very high-performing audio equipment, and he was a connoisseur of classical music particularly. And he came to my attention because of some newspaper article. No, it was in Time magazine, actually, a couple of paragraphs in Time magazine. And I thought, oh, wow. He said that simply by examining the face of an LP recording, that's made with vinyl and such, these are things you may not remember at all. And I had a needle that rested on, like this, and around went the turntable. And he said that by examining the surface of a classical recording, that he could tell what the recording was of. I thought, that's quite remarkable. I very much doubt that. And I ranted and raved briefly. And so I looked him up and I said, I'd like to test your ability. This is before the $1,000 challenge, or before the $10,000, or the $1 million challenge. So forgive me, but it was, well, just before that, not too long before that. And so he said, oh, yes, sure. So I went out to visit him. He lived in New Jersey somewhere or other, and turned out to be a very charming gentleman. And he showed me his vast record collection. And I said, well, I will prepare some samples, and I will come back, and we'll give you 10 recordings as tests. So I went home, and I looked into my own record collection, and then something occurred to me. Because in between where the label is and the blank spot where the needle will freeze at the end, go pew, 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 as it turned around, I saw there was a number stamp there. Aha! Now that's the number of the mold that's used to make the recording, you see.
Inscribed into the actual plastic.
Embossed into it. And I thought, well, if he had an index someplace, you know, I'm sure these indexes exist. Google would have them today, of course. Google knows everything, as we all know. And I thought, okay, so I'll cover that over, and I put a sticker on top of that, and covered over the label itself. Made sure there were no impressions left. The printing didn't, it was raised printing on the recording at that time. Made sure it didn't show. Packed up 10 of them, labeled, and I blinded myself to it by mixing them up. I knew what I had in there. I knew what the target pool was,
but
I
didn't know which one you were going to put in front of
Yes,
them.
that's right. I just labeled them A, and A2 on the other side, and B, B2 on the other side, and mixed them up thoroughly, went across to meet them, and we sat down and picked one of them, put it on the turntable, and, I let him examine it thoroughly, and he came up with a conclusion on it, and we wrote that down. Now, it was very hard. I knew what the target pool was, you see. I knew whether this was Stravinsky or whatever, and so I had to maintain a complete poker face, because if he was right, I was saying, uh-oh, and there goes the whole game, you see. But he would give me his opinion on the thing. He went through all the recordings, and he came up with one. He looked at both sides of it, and he said, this is garbage. So this is, A, it's not classical, and it appears to me to be conversation. Yes, I'm pretty sure that's conversation. I said, well, we do have some in here that are that are dummies that we mixed in there. Wanted to see if you could tell, and put it aside. And my heart sank a little bit. And it turned out that that was, are you ready? So You Want to Be a Magician. Does anyone know who made that recording? It was an LP recording from many, many years ago.
I think it was Duke Stern.
I believe you're right. Yeah, thank you, Max. He knows everything that Google doesn't know. Yeah, So You Want to Be a Magician. And it was conversation on both sides. Damn, the guy was good, you see. He didn't know what the recording was, but he knew it wasn't classical music, and it had to be classical music. That was his specialty. He looked at another one, and this was divided up into songs or whatever, into sections. And he looked at it, and he said, oh, this is very noisy. And no, I don't think this is classical either. No, this is noisy, and I just have to give up on that one. Turned out to be Alice Cooper. I worked, and you wouldn't know this, but I worked for 90 days with Alice Cooper many years ago in the $1 Billion Babies tour, chopping his head off every night with a Will Rock guillotine. It never worked. He was back the next night. But and also playing the part of the mad dentist. I was not billed with the show, just as part of the cast, as J. Randi, that's all. But I didn't want, I wasn't content playing second fiddle or second banana, I should say, second banana.
Second something.
Something, yeah. But I didn't want to be identified with the show. But Coop, as we all know him, is still a good friend of mine. He's turned into a Jesus freak lately, but he doesn't try that on me. He knows better than to do that. But I went to his 60th birthday party, almost 2 years ago now, and we had a ball, and we relived old days. But that was one of the recordings that he had there. But the other ones, he looked at one of them, for example, and he said, oh, this is a Telefunken recording. How can you tell a Telefunken recording from other ones? And he said, oh, this is a Columbia recording. How do you know? And he identified the music as well. Now, what he was working on was the size of the movements and the number of movements in the symphony, if it was a complete symphony on two sides of an LP, you see. And he was looking at the dynamics, too. And he even said to me, he said, look at this here. He said, you could almost hear it. Dum 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 da da dum dum bum 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 ba da bum bum bum. You see the difference in the amplitude here? And that's a Columbia recording, because Columbia recording spaced the grooves differently according to the amplitude. He gave me a whole technical primer on the thing. He knew what he was doing, and he won hands down, except for the two recordings, one of which was...
Well, but the two recordings he won in the sense that he identified them as not being classical music.
Yeah, and he was exactly right all the way through. So if I'd been awarding the $1 billion, which I wouldn't have done in that case, because this is within the realm of possibility.
Well, now, let me jump in on that.
Okay.
I would not call what this fellow's ability was, I would not define that as psychic ability, but I would certainly, by my use of the word, I would call it paranormal, because normal people can't do that. And not even a lot of special people. I mean, I don't know of anybody who can do that but this one guy. Now, there may be others, but the point is, this is such a rarefied skill, and when it was described to you, you were so convinced that it was a scam or a fake of some sort.
Oh, yeah.
If the prize had been in the works, and if he had said, I claim I can do this, and you had said, I don't believe you, this doesn't fit in my worldview, I don't think you can look at an album and figure out what type of music is on it, why wouldn't he have walked away with
not what type of music, but the specific music. It was even better than just the type of music, the specific music.
But under those circumstances, why wouldn't he have qualified for the prize?
No, he would have. He would have. I wouldn't have put the two dummies in there, the spoilers, into there, Alice Cooper and Duke Stern. I have great respect for Duke Stern, don't make any mistake, but he didn't match the criterion for the protocol. But no, I think you're absolutely right, Max. I could have lost the challenge. I could very well have. Because he was so very, very knowledgeable. And when he was able to give you reasons for it before we played the recording, Now, I knew that it was in the target pool again, so I suspected he's probably right, damn it, you know. But I've sort of lost track of the gentleman since.
I remember talking to you about this fellow not that long afterwards, and you told the story with great delight because it was such a remarkable punchline, basically, that he could do it. When it happened, did it disturb you? Did it shake you up? Did it make you question, if you'll forgive my phrasing, did it make you question your faith in what is within the range of human capability and what is beyond?
Yes, it did. It did. I was so surprised by it, but I was also thrilled that this guy could do this wonderful stunt, which Time magazine had written up, and they were amazed by it, and rightly so. But I was quite excited. I didn't feel threatened or anything like that. No, hey, and another thing too. Let's face it. If I lost that $1 million challenge, I'd probably also get a Nobel Prize. Worth more than $1 million, you see. Yeah, no, it would be a major discovery. So I can't lose the challenge. I can lose the $1 million, yes, but I can't lose the challenge in the long run because I would have discovered something and revealed it to the world that is really valuable. There's a force here called ESP, and it can be used. Hallelujah.
All right.
Pardon the religious expression.
We understand you're being metaphorical.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Given that there is that tiny window of possibility, as evidenced by this crazy story about this guy who could read, your immediate response when you heard about this was, he's got a gimmick, he's got a technique. And I'm sure because you're a clever guy and you think in these ways, you immediately started thinking of methods.
Oh, yeah.
You, I'm sure, came up with a dozen different ways it could be done. This brings me to a quote that I often think of when I'm discussing or thinking about the modern skeptical movement. And it's a quote from Cesare Lombroso, who was a little over a century ago one of the founding fathers of criminal forensics.
I knew him well, yeah.
Yeah. When the beard was darker.
Yes.
But Cesare Lombroso once said, and here I'm translating into English because I don't know the original Italian phrasing, the existence of wigs does not disprove the existence of hair.
I recall this now, yes, it's wonderful.
And I'd like you to respond to that in the following sense. As a performer, a clever thinker, a clever inventor, someone who thinks seriously about these topics, and when confronted with something that doesn't seem plausible, you can come up with 5, 10, 50 methods for making a key bend or telling someone what they've written in private on a piece of paper or all of these other claims. But to what extent do you keep in mind the essence of that Lombroso quote? I'm not saying that you think specifically of that quote, but in other words, when you figure out a method to duplicate something that you've seen someone do or that you've heard someone claimed to be able to do, does the minute you come up with a solution, do you then, I'm not going to say you're done, because you're obviously not done, you're too smart for that, but does some part of you sort of relax and say, okay, it can be faked, so I feel more secure in doubting it?
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, when I came upon the business of the mold number on the inside edge of the recording, it occurred to me right away, I said, I think I got it. So when I covered that over, I was feeling a little bit pompous-assed, I must say. But I gave him the recordings, and he said, oh. He said, yes. He said, that number, that's a production number. He said, that would give it away, wouldn't it? He said, oh, well, how interesting. He'd never thought of that, obviously. But I had in my devious way, you see. But we think like magicians.
Right.
We don't think like the ordinary citizens out there. And it's not a better way of thinking necessarily, it's a different way.
No, but it's a different way, and it has value.
Oh, yes.
Which leads me to something you said just about a year ago at the Amazing Meeting, which is the annual event in Las Vegas that is built around the amazing Randi. And I wasn't there last year, but I saw, thanks to DJ, a recording, a video recording, of a panel discussion on which you were involved. And you made a really interesting comment that builds on an earlier comment. You, among others, but probably you're the most well-known voice to say that scientists who are exploring things that are apparently impossible should invite magicians to help them, because magicians will look at these things and think of things that a scientist will miss.
That's right, yes.
But you appended that in the conversation that I saw on tape by saying that sometimes a magician coming in with an explanation can cause problems rather than solve them. Do you remember? I'm trying not to say too much to let you talk about it, but if I'm being too obscure, tell me.
You're far too obscure, man.
All right. Your point was this, that sometimes, for example, when Uri Geller first surfaced, there were several magicians who were asked by scientists to come in and watch what Uri Geller did.
Oh, yes.
And they said, huh, we're fooled. We don't know, we don't see any methods here. We as magicians validate that it seems to be real. And that actually caused problems, because sometimes a magician in the laboratory isn't helping things by coming on as if I have all the answers. You poor scientist, you don't have any. Trust me, and if I can't see a solution, then it must be what it purports to be. And I thought that was an interesting adjustment on the original statement of the value of magicians in the laboratory.
Oh, yes, and not only that, I always specify, it's not any magician who is prepared to do this. Now, certainly you, I believe myself, and many, many people in this room, of course, would be sufficiently talented, sufficiently knowledgeable, and sufficiently perceptive to be able to solve these things. But not everyone. The average fellow who does, and I'm not demeaning the children's birthday party magician. They have a function, and I have seen some that are just so consummately clever at it. They know kids, and they know how to please them, and to avoid the cupcakes as they come. But
This from a man who did play the magic clown on television.
Oh yes, yes. Hi, boys and girls. I'm the magic clown. What do I do? What did I just say?
I don't know, but you've always said that channeling was a fake.
That's very true, yeah. Oh, my goodness. I give up, I surrender. Here's $1 million. Yeah, no, that's very true. Magicians that will know a good deal about magic don't necessarily know the twists and turns. And the people who we will not name that were called in by the scientists, other magicians were called in who knew that, like Ray Hyman, for example, knew the solution right away and told them. They ignored it. They didn't want to hear that. And several other people that are knowledgeable, scientists who are knowledgeable about conjuring tricks and methods and everything, told them exactly what was happening, and they said, no, that's not true, it's not true. They only took the answers that they preferred to take. And by the way, I just figured out what the story was that I held up on there.
Okay.
Yes. John Beloff. Now, the Parapsychological Association, yeah, you'll love this. The Parapsychological Association said that as a result of Project Alpha, which was reported in Time magazine and on NBC, on the Today Show and whatnot with Brian Gumbel, that's a long time ago, as you know, that it would be I think they said something to the effect that it would be well to call in a magician when and if it was possible that deception would be used with which scientists wouldn't be familiar. And I thought, oh, that's wonderful, thank you very much. But then they went on to say that we would suggest only members of the International Brotherhood of Magicians, the Society of American Magicians, or one, I think it was a Magicians Guild at that time.
That's
okay.
Still around, yeah. Was still around, I should say.
I wasn't a member of any of those three at that time, and they knew damn well I wasn't. So in other words, except for James Randi.
Well, you have to at least give them credit for something.
But I, at that time, was a member of the Magic Circle, as I am now, with Gold Star yet, MIMC, so there. I'm not wearing my medal. It's too heavy for my chest. But I promptly joined all three organizations, of course, in order to get around that.
Perfect.
And but John Beloff did call me in. Now, what he did was he notified me by telephone in those days, and he said, we have a young fellow here who is causing spoons and cutlery and whatnot to bend, a la Uri Geller, and he insists that he be all alone in the laboratory with the lights down low and such, and that he has to rest and relax for a good 20 minutes before it happens, and then he calls us when the spoons are bent. And indeed, when we enter the laboratory again, there they are, they're bent. This didn't offer me a great intellectual challenge. I thought
I think even members of the IBM and SAM could have handled that.
Yes, you can. We're in trouble now. And you
No, I'm the one who said it.
Yeah, yes, yeah, but they'll associate me with you, so I have to back out now. Goodbye. Yes. Now, John Beloff said that this was the situation, and he asked me, he said, what should I do? And I said, well, you have video cameras there, don't you? And he said, oh, yes, but they must be turned off. He insisted that he can't be observed because they don't work when they're being observed. He's absolutely right in that. They don't work when they're being observed. And I said, but John, what you could do is just unscrew the little red light there, take out the bulb, put it back in again, and he's used to seeing the tally light, such as on that camera there, on this camera over here. That means that the camera is actually functioning. He's used to seeing that, and when he doesn't see that red light, he'll probably assume that
he is not being.
And I said, get a power cord and coil it up and lay it right beside the camera. You see. Well, John did that, but much against his will. He said, oh, that would be deception. And I said, yes, but wait a minute, John. You're asking for a way around this so that you can find out whether or not the gentleman is really doing it by psychic means or not. And he said, well, yes, but I have a hard time with that ethically. And I said, well, you do what you have to do. Well, he called me a couple of weeks later, said they caught him red-handed. The red-handed, red light, you get it? Little. He said that the minute that they left the laboratory and closed, they boink, boink, with all the spoon, twisted them around, and did the whole thing, and then went and laid down with the blindfold over his eyes again. And then he called them. I think it's happened. And they came in, and lo, it had happened. Now, it turned out, I didn't know it at the time. I was claiming this was a major victory because I'd helped these people. It turned out that this was a young magician who was trying to do a Project Alpha. He was trying to do the same thing that we had done, and then he would say to them, ha ha, I fooled you, and the whole business, but he never got around to that point because they just tossed him out of the lab.
Well, because they did what the previous recipients of the Project Alpha technique didn't do.
Yeah,
they called you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, but that was the only group that, oh, and, another one was Professor Phillips, yes, who was going off to China. Phillips was the guy at Washington University who ran the Project Alpha thing and was totally taken in by them. And by the way, I must add, in summary of that, we had agreed, the Alpha kids and myself had a firm agreement at the very beginning that if they were ever asked when they were in the laboratory, was that a trick, they were to immediately say, without hesitation, yes, it was a trick, and we were sent here by James Randi, and then explain the whole thing. And they were almost asked, because I would write letters to Phillips at the lab after they had described me on the phone what they had done and how they'd gotten away with murder. It was wonderful. I mean, again, we could do a whole evening on the tricks that they used, and it's going to come out in my book, A Magician in the Laboratory, which I'm sure you'll all rush off and buy copies of immediately, of course. And that story is going to be completely told there. But we had made the additional agreement that if the scientists involved ever announced that they were about to publish, we would stop it right there, and we would go to them and say, you've been fooled, here's how you've been fooled, and give them a complete confession of the whole thing. And I would add to that, and I would go all the way to St. Louis, Missouri, and I would confess the whole thing to them and go into detail. But what happened was, you remember the name Marcello Truzzi?
I knew Marcello quite well.
Okay, Marcello Truzzi was a fence sitter. He never wanted to say that there wasn't, now his family was in show business, in the circus, as a matter of fact, and they knew magic, and he knew thoroughly well how Geller was doing his sort of thing, but he decided that he would sit on the fence and not say anything about it, And he just didn't know, and I'm not sure, you know, maybe and maybe not. But that I never quite forgave Marcello for. But he's now someplace else. But that's called deceased, I believe, yes. So he can't be offended by this, I hope. And I rather resented that, but Marcello sat in on a group that was at the paranormal conference that I attended, one of them that I attended, when Phillips was going to make an address on the final day. And he listened in on a conversation from around the corner, and he heard me telling a reporter about this sort of thing. And I knew very well he was there. I could see his shadow. He didn't conceal himself very well. There was a black marble pillar there, and I could see his reflection in it.
It makes sense because Marcello's son, Carlo, actually tours the world with a shadowgraph show.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh.
So a family tradition. Go ahead.
Add that to the file. Anyway, I knew that he was listening in, and I used that as my method for tipping them off. Because I felt sure that if I called them into a conference and said, guys, you were fooled, and this is how you were fooled, and here are the two kids, and they said, yes, this is what we did, they'd say, oh, yeah, sure, come on, now you're saying that, but we proved it. But I let Marcello do it. That was my subtle way, because they trusted Marcello. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't trust me, or they wouldn't trust the kids at that point, you see. So Marcello tipped them off, and they found out the day before their paper came out, and they were going to distribute copies to everybody. They had to go and reprint it, and all they did was add modifiers in, like apparently and possibly and ostensibly and a few things like that. They were all strewn all through the paper, so they saved their collective ass. They frightened the expression, but that's the only one that serves. But that's the way we did it. We revealed it before they were actually able to go out and take the disclaim of the Parapsychological Association.
I have to jump in for a second to say about Marcello, because he was a good friend. I didn't think of Marcello as a fence sitter or a fence straddler. I thought of him as a fence balancer.
Okay.
It was a very deliberate stance.
Yeah, yeah.
You can disagree with the stance, but it was deliberate. It wasn't because he was trying to cover all bases. It was because he was interested in all sides of the discussion.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate that, Max. Thank you. Yep.
I'm not saying that you should have any greater respect or affection for him than you did 2 minutes ago.
No.
I just wanted to put that in there because I thought he was a great guy.
He was the editor of Skeptical Inquirer.
He was the original editor when Psycho first started.
And he had to be put away because, not put away, taken off the, out of the position, pardon me, taken out of that position because he insisted that the Skeptical Inquirer would represent both sides of the situation. The parapsychologists never gave us a chance to say anything about these things. They just kept us out of it altogether.
Fair enough.
We never got any publication space or anything. And I said, no, that's not going to happen. And incidentally, I left PSYCOP, the Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, because of a very simple difference of opinion, so to speak. And Paul Kurtz, a dear friend, I swear, a dear friend, and a very reputable gentleman and a good scientist and such, we have now made up. I was going to say kissed and made up, but Paul wouldn't object to that. And it would be true, too. I didn't kiss, just a little hug. But Paul Kurtz and I have made up since. He came to me after Geller threatened lawsuit against me and against PSYCOP for the articles that we had published and such, and the criticism that we made of him. Now, Geller has sued people all over the world. He sued me many times, never won a nickel from me. But he cost me a lot of money. He cost me most of the MacArthur Prize, as a matter of fact, which was $272,000 over that 5-year period. He cost me most of that simply from legal fees that I had to pay. No one else was paying my legal fees. That was quite arduous for me. Very difficult for me to meet that expense. But Marcello, well, in doing this sort of thing, I didn't ever dislike him. I always liked Marcello. But then Paul Kurtz, when he came to me and said, we've got to agree, because of this whole thing, we've got to agree not to ever mention Geller again. And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, Paul, we were organized to come out against people like this, and tell the truth about them. That's what our sole purpose is. He said, well, it's getting too expensive. He's going to sue us, and it'll cost us a lot of money. I simply took my pen out, I stuck it in the table, and I walked out and never went back. I am since back with the Committee for Scientific Investigation. Claims of Paranormal, now known as CSI, the Committee for Scientific Inquiry. I'm back with them, and we're all lovey-dovey again, and stuff like that. So I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be back.
We're running along, and yet we could continue this for a long time to come, except we have an audience of people who are sitting on what I know to be less than comfortable chairs. How are we doing?
Well, these are fine.
We got a little time for a little more? Because there's one more segment I'd like to toss out. I'd like you to tell a story that is one of your most celebrated accomplishments, and then I have a follow-up question. There was, some years ago, a fellow named Peter Popoff. And I hear by the reaction that many people know where we're going with this. Peter Popoff was a faith healer.
No, he said he was a faith healer.
Well, okay. I was using those same invisible quotes that you were using earlier.
Okay, all right.
But Peter Popoff claimed to be a faith healer and claimed that he was receiving messages from a supernatural source. The source was discovered to be different thanks to your efforts.
Somewhat different, yes.
So why don't you give us a quick rundown of the Peter Popoff story?
We don't have the videotape.
Unfortunately, we're not in a position to show it at this time, no.
All right, okay.
But I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. I was alerted, I happened to be in California, and I was alerted to the fact that, in San Francisco, I was alerted to the fact that this fellow, Peter Popoff, was preaching locally to a huge stadium full of people, and that he was claiming that he could heal them by gesturing at them and bringing them the Holy Spirit and whatnot, and that he knew their names for some strange reason. He even sometimes gave them their address. And I thought, well, this sounds like mentalism to me of some kind. And I can teach you this if you want, Max.
I was watching the Carson show. I've been.
Oh, okay. You're already ahead of me then. Okay. And so I went in there and saw it, and I was indeed quite puzzled. I thought, wow, he is able to call them by their first and sometimes their last name, and then give addresses when he felt like it, apparently. And he knew what their affliction was, too. Wow. I said, well, there's got to be some way that he's found out about this. Went back the second night, but this time I brought Steve Shaw, Banachek, along with me. And this before he was Banachek. And he festooned himself with all kinds of identity cards around his neck and such. And guards, when they see somebody like that coming, they say, go, 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 go. They don't want to read all this stuff. And that's fine for us. And so I sent Steve to sort of follow Popoff around, and he did. He came back after the first 10 minutes, and he said, he's wearing a hearing aid in his left ear. Now, this is a guy that was supposed to be healing the deaf. And I thought that rather strange. And Steve found that to be very, pardon me, Banachek, I should say. Banachek found that to be a little strange, too. And so we did a bit of research. I had a good friend there, Alec Jason, who was a private investigator, very good at what he did, and still very active in the field. And I spoke to him, and he said, oh, yeah, this is my forte. I can do this. I'm emotionally overcome, as you can see. And he went in festooned with all kinds of identification and dressed in working clothes with a coil of wire around his waist and a Walkman plugged into his ear, apparently. That Walkman was going, but that's not what was plugged into his ear. He had a listening device, a field strength meter that scanned the whole radio frequency band and picked up all different transmitters that would be in use in the area, starting with low frequencies and working all the way up. And at a certain time, he had the means to record them if he pressed the button. And he came to us with a big smile on his face after half an hour of this, and he said, oh boy, we got him. By the short hairs, let's say. And he said, yeah, this is it's going to be quite something. So I listened to what he was doing. Now, as I say, the system scanned, and it would stop at a certain place. And the first thing he heard when it reached this frequency of 31.170 megahertz, I think it was, something like that, he heard Mrs. Popoff saying, "Hello, Petey, can you hear me? I hope so. If you can't hear me, you're in deep shit." And I said, yeah, that's the kind of talk I want to hear. And so I got this recording, and we found out that he was being cued by his wife from backstage, and he had a hearing aid stuck in his ear with no wire leading down from it because it was fed by induction from a coil around his neck underneath his shirt. And some mentalists may even use dastardly means like this for communication. I doubt it very much, but it's quite possible, I think. Within the field of possibility, let's put it that way. And so he was doing it by this means, and so I made recordings of this, and I took him on a cassette to Fred de Cordova, who was Johnny Carson's producer at the time, now both deceased. And I said, Fred, you got to listen to this. And he said, oh yeah, I've heard of this guy. And he listened to it, and he said, damn, we'll put that on tonight. He said, and he turned to his assistant, and he said, the two teeny bopper actresses and everything, bump them, tell them they'll go on next week or something. Well, we got to drop this in place. And he reached for the phone, and I said, wait, are you going to tell John? He said, oh yeah. I said, no, don't tell John, because think of the expression on his face. And Fred looked at me, he said, John doesn't like surprises. He wants to know what's going to happen. I said, yeah, but just think the expression on his face when he hears this other voice coming through in the... See, because what we were planning to do, and what we did, was we played the tape as it was seen by the audience, and then we played it again with Mrs. Popoff's voice superimposed over it, you see. That's the part that the audience wasn't hearing. Well, de Cordova looked at the desk for a minute, he looked up at me and he said, but it's on your head, this may be the end of you. And I said, I'll take a chance. And he said, okay. So we did it that night. And the reaction was just stupendous. Now, I'll let you in on a bit of a secret, which I let some of my audiences in on, though I usually use this in my lecture, my public lecture at the universities and colleges and whatnot, around the world again. And I will let you in on something that I sometimes let them in on, but not all that frequently. There's an edit in the tape. Now, they recorded that 3 hours before it actually got broadcast in the 4 different time zones.
And in theory, it was live to tape, which means their rule was they didn't edit out anything.
Yeah.
But they did on this evening.
They did on this particular one, for a good reason, as you'll see. Now, Johnny was not informed, and he met me before, he would always meet me before the show, come to the dressing room, and we'd chat about a few things. And he said, this is a mystery thing you're doing tonight. And I said, yeah, but you'll get a big kick out of it, John. I want to see the expression on your face. And he was not ready for this quite, because what they showed was the tape as the audience at home would see it. And then it came back to me, to Johnny, and we sitting at the desk. And I said, now we'll see it again, but we'll see it with the additional recording in here of what Popoff was hearing through a hearing aid in his ear. And Johnny just signaled like this, and they went to the tape. Now, what actually happened in the recording, the taping of the Tonight Show on that particular night, was Johnny got to the point where we're about to do this, and they played the tape. Johnny looked, and he heard her saying, Petey, this is your wife, and the whole thing. And he said, oh, shit. And then he grabbed his mouth, and he went like this to the audience to shush them up. And of course, they were hard to shush up, but they were on separate mic system, you see, so it could be edited out later. Although Johnny's voice did come through, and we had to edit that whole section out, or they had to. They took care of that. But that's a little story that I sometimes share with my audience. And so when you see the tape again, and you will, it's on YouTube, and you'll see it, I'm sure. When you see Johnny come out of the tape, and he's doing this with his pen. Now, when John did this with his pen at the desk, that meant he was very disturbed. I knew him well for so many, many years, and I did so many of the programs. that when he was doing this, he was disturbed. And he started to do that with his big yellow pencil that he always had in his hand, or in his pocket at least. And he was disturbed, and he said in front of the audience, he said, well, you know, that's somewhat disturbing when you see it. And the audience tittered a bit there. They couldn't take that out. It would be too difficult to do. They sort of tittered a bit because they had heard him say, oh, shit, you know, this kind of thing, and then shushed them down. So when you see that tape, you'll see the spot where you know the edit's made. You'll get an additional kick out of it. I think you'll appreciate that. Anyway, it was a great victory. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, here's the question that I need to follow up with. The Popoff exposure with this extraordinary, I mean, it was just so clear. He was cheating.
Yeah.
There's the evidence. This was back before the proliferation of cable, when the Carson Show had tens of millions of viewers and everybody talked about it the next day. And indeed they did.
Oh, yeah.
This was water cooler conversation for weeks. And Popoff was pushed off the map as far as the world of so-called faith healing.
Yep.
However, in the time since then, slowly but surely, he has returned. And although I doubt most people in this audience are aware of him, he is now making lots and lots of money, doing the same nonsense that he was doing before you exposed him. You held him up. You slowed him down.
A bit of a bump in
He
the
had
road.
a few years where he was kind of obliged to lay low, but he's returned, and he's now still doing this evil stuff. Does this make you crazy? Does this drive you nuts that you had this guy? You couldn't have done better as far as making the point,
Yep.
and yet, for whatever reason, the public's desire to believe, the sneakiness of this particular guy and knowing how to play his market, whatever, he managed to survive and now is prospering, despite your magnificent success in exposing him.
Well, Max, you used the phrase, the public's desire to believe. I don't use that expression. I say the public's need to believe. They
Okay.
really have a very strong need to believe in something supernatural, and if someone like Popoff comes along and apparently presents it to them, they grab it. They grab it and they believe it and they don't doubt it at all. I had many people after the exposure that got in touch with me, and this is in the days before email and such, and they got in touch with me by phone usually, and some of them even came around to the foundation, almost to a person. They said the same thing. I want to thank you very much, Mr. Randi. Now I know that Peter Popoff is a total fraud and a fake. So now I'm giving my money to Reverend so-and-so, to some other healer on television, and oh yes, because I know that she's the real thing here, you know, because she never did anything like that. They didn't know that, but that's what the result was.
Now, if I were in your position, hearing that after all this work and succeeding in revealing this to the world, I would be filled with despair. And if there's one word I would never attach to you, over the many years I've known you, I've seen you in a whole variety of emotional states, but despair isn't one of them. You still have
Because I'm not smart enough to have despair.
okay. But what is it that in the face of this makes you feel it's worth pushing? Because this is not just a casual thing. This is what you've devoted your life to now.
Well,
What keeps you going?
Max, I will send you, I'll make a note to do it. I really will do it. I'll send you a few of the bits of emails that I get every week. Now, I get 120 to 140 emails every day. Many of them can be answered with stock answers. Thank you very much for your kind comments. I hope that you'll stay tuned, and etc. But I have to answer a great number of them. It takes a good portion of my day to do that. But they drop into my email, and they come in the mail in the form of written letters. I have 2 on my desk back in Fort Lauderdale right now, from people who usually start out saying, I really hated your guts, Mr. Randi, or something to that effect, when I read this book, Flim Flam. And, you know, I got about 2/3 of the way through, and then suddenly it occurred to me, damn, he's right, because they checked up on these things. And they've read other books by me, and they often come to this conclusion. I even had a young lawyer show up at the door with a briefcase and a tattered copy. Oh, I love tattered copies of Flim Flam. When they're really well used and well thumbed and with margins, comments and such, I'd love to see those because people really read the book. And he stopped and he said, you know, Mr. Randi, he said, I changed my major. I wanted to be a psychologist. In fact, I wanted to be a parapsychologist. And he said, and I read Flim Flam, and I really hated it. And then I checked up and I found, damn, I think you're right. And he showed me this tattered copy. I immediately got him a new copy and autographed it to him and gave it to him. I have that tattered copy. It's a wonderful thing to have with the comments and the margin. This man is a fool, kind of thing. Not referring to the guy in the text, but to me, of course.
The author, yes.
Yes, and no, nonsense and everything scribbled across the page. He was very angry about the whole thing. But I saved someone, well, he's now a lawyer, so that may be even worse, but I'm not too sure. But no, that's what makes it rewarding, is the mail that I get from people saying, you made a big difference in my life.
In their lives.
Yep.
Well, I think I can speak for this assembled group. Their very presence and numbers indicate it's true that you have made a difference in a lot of lives. And the people here appreciate that and appreciate James Randi.
Oh, my God. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, young man.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Oh, but, well, yeah, I've got to have a layman to do it with.
Listen, I tell you what. This is the longest interview we have ever done here, and we didn't even scratch the surface. I would like to put Randi on the spot by saying, we're going to do part 2.
Oh, okay. Tomorrow?
I will be in touch with DJ. We will figure out when your schedule will allow. We will do a second part where we can pick up on all the many stories and questions we didn't get to this time. And this time, for part 2, we'll have some books.
Oh, great. Okay.
Is it a deal? All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, folks. Much appreciated. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, I think I can go home now. Oh, goodness, all right. Memory is failing me at the moment. It'll come to me in about 20 minutes and I'll yell it out.
Okay, if you suddenly blurt out the name of the magic
you'll know what that is.
We'll
okay?
connect it
You're
back
prepared
to
for
this.
that? All right. And yeah, we formed our own little group there, and a junior member. Most of us weren't old enough to join the Hat and Rabbit Club. That was very distinguished. Only people this high. You know, I was this high, and I still am, as a matter of fact.
Now, at what point, obviously you started with the paddle trick, watching illusion shows, that suggests an eclectic interest, but you began to specialize at a fairly young age in a couple of very narrowly defined areas of magic.
Yep. I specialized in mentalism, and you're familiar with the art, I believe.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. I'll bet. Yes, I started out as a mentalist, and I soon found that I could make very big money at kids' birthday parties and such, as many as $5 at a shot. Wow. And that was very good for a kid my age. But again, remember that I was on this list of kids that didn't have to go to school. I went, at the age of 17, I went to high school because I had to develop a peer group. I hadn't mixed with kids. I didn't know one kid from the other and didn't have any close friends in that direction. But I was well into magic by that time, and I discovered mentalism along the way when I saw a gentleman a little later named Chan Canasta. You may know the name Chan Canasta. Some of you will, and of course you would know. And he did a book test. Damn, that was a book test. As a matter of fact, but I must tell you, Chan is no longer with us.
Correct. Not that many years ago, but...
All right. Well, when I saw Chan Canasta do the book test, I didn't figure it out the first time, but I went to see a second show later on in the day, and I figured out, that's pretty damn clever. Wow. And I developed my own little version of it over the years. Anybody would like to see me do it, we go to the Magic Library, which is not too far from where I sit at this very moment. We may select a couple of books off the shelf there, and I may demonstrate for you if you'd like to see it. My own particular version of it.
Thank you, arranged.
All right. But that was the first thing that I practiced. I actually got paid $75 a week at a local nightclub doing table work from one table to the other.
And you were at what age at this point?
I was 17, I guess.
17.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't drink, but you could do card tricks.
Some mentalism during it in order to show my audience how the so-called psychics work. It's an illustration of how they do their thing. I don't give away any of your material because it's impossible to do that. And but this is a strange thing, and it'll just show you how we're going downhill in some respects. I used to use the line, people talk to me after these shows, and they often comment, you know, you don't seem to be getting any older at all. You look about the same as you did about 30 years ago. And I would look at them and say, yes, that's true, but I have a painting in my attic. I don't use that line anymore because they don't laugh. They don't know what I'm referring to. And I look over the audience, and I've given it up quite some time ago, and I look over the audience hoping I'll find a teacher of English literature, perhaps, in there. And I say, Dorian? Gray? Nothing. Okay, moving right along. But I don't use that line any longer. Can you believe it? That there's a generation. Now, when I get a generation where I mention Johnny Carson and they say, who? I know I'm in deep trouble, but I hope I live that long.
Well, the fact that so many people here obviously did get the Dorian Gray reference indicates that we have both a literate audience and an old audience.
Sure. What's wrong with being old? There's nothing wrong with it, right, guys?
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
In fact, correct me if I am wrong, Sarah, but I believe you at this moment are 82.
That's water.
They told me. Hold on. Is it 82, correct?
I am 82, as of August the 7th, yes. And going strong, still at it.
Now, I want to turn the clock back a little bit. I don't really want to run through a kind of chronological biography. First of all, because we'd be here till tomorrow morning.
Very true.
But second of all, a lot of your accomplishments are well known. But I want to just take a moment to talk about the very early days. What got you started in magic as a kid? What got you involved in certain specific fields of magic? And what led to your getting arrested for busting up a church meeting? And this is all early stuff, and then we can come to more recent events.
About the age of 11, we can start off again, yes. Just a very, got to be a reason for this. Could it be hypnosis, secret drugs in the drinking water? Or what is it? Or, damn, maybe it's a trick. And I decided that was probably it. And I set out to find out how it was done. My first step was to walk outside the theater at the end of the show, all the way around the back, and finding Harry Blackstone with his wing collar open, no air conditioning in those days, and fanning himself like crazy. And he came over to me and he said, yes, young man, what can I do for you? I said, well, I'm sort of interested in what you do here. He took me backstage, this lovely old gentleman, among the equipment. and into the dressing room, took a poster, the one that you see here in the castle, on the main floor, the one with the levitated camel. Very, very famous poster, worth a fortune these days, I'm sure. And he signed it to Randall, that's my original first name, and he signed it Harry Blackstone, rolled it up. He taught me the paddle move. Most of us know what that is, right? You don't know? Oh, too bad. A deep secret that I can't share with you, I'm sorry. The paddle move, I did that for the next 6 weeks, I swear. I'm still pretty good at it. And I took the poster, got onto the tram, rode up to Leaside, where I lived at the time, the north end of Toronto, got on the bus, transferred over to the bus, got home, walked in the door, very, very late, and my mother was very annoyed at me, and I looked, and I didn't have the poster. Someplace in a bus in Toronto, Canada, there is a poster riding around in the back seat with my name on it, signed by Harry Blackstone. Yes, I never saw that poster again. I was devastated, but it had its reward, because every year after that, Harry Blackstone came at about the same time in the autumn to the Casino Theatre in Toronto, Canada. We would receive 4 tickets at my home in the mail, and we went every year to see that gentleman. Oh my goodness, Harry Blackstone Sr. I got to know Junior eventually too, for many years, but Senior had won my heart, and he was the one who was responsible for getting me into the magic trade. I joined the Hat and Rabbit Club in Toronto, Canada.
Still active?
Oh yes, the IBM group there. And in fact, we formed our own club. Yes, but that was, what was it called? A brief background, I'm not going to go into great detail on this. I was one of those child prodigy things, and it was a very, seriously, very unhappy time of my life, because I didn't have a peer group. I was mixing with kids that were 6 and 8 years older than I was, and were already in school and in high school and such. But I got a special pass from this was in Toronto, Canada. Actually, if you're from Toronto, you have to say Trana. T-R-A-N-N-A, you see, that's the way they say it. If not, if they don't spell it that way, that's their fault. I had a special pass, a little card that I carried with me. It was apparently very seldom issued, but it was a truancy pass to show to truancy officers if I was found on a bus or a streetcar somewhere, or perhaps in a theater even. Ooh, perish the thought. When I was supposed to be in school. And I lost that only about 7 or 8 years ago. What a pity. That was a great souvenir, because I'd like to whip it out of my wallet and say, I'm legal. See? But being a child prodigy like that, again, was not a happy time of my life. But I got a lot of free time. I used to hang out around the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and also at the Toronto Public Library. And I got to go to Wednesday afternoon matinees. And it cost 14 cents in those days. Can you imagine? Whew. That was hard to come up with that 14 cents. And I went there one time when a man named Harry Blackstone was featured. I had never seen a magician before. And seeing Harry I'm speaking senior now, of course. Seeing Harry Blackstone and watching him stand there on the stage with Princess Asra rising in the air, and then pausing and turning to the audience and saying, he had a lisp, as you probably know. You see this young lady suspended in the air between heaven and earth. She could stay there, should I so desire, for 1,000 years and a day. But in the interest of time and in your patience, I will return her to the couch from which she rose only a moment ago. Princess? And the music would start up, and she would come back down, and in the second balcony, that was 14 cents. I was totally captivated. I thought, damn.
So if you could wrap up those undoubtedly intriguing conversations and give us your attention, I would like to introduce the gentleman of the evening, a fellow who is no stranger to the Magic Castle or the Magic World, as we'll be discussing, but as is also evidenced by how many of you have come out to see him this evening. To try and list this one individual's credits would take a very long time, which is why we're going to do it during the interview. And we're going to fill that up with not only a lot of information, hopefully some of which will be news to you, surprising things about some of this gentleman's accomplishments, but also we're going to talk about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff and some of the ideas that have informed his campaigns and crusades. Shall we use that term lightly? So without further ado, would you please welcome a gentleman who truly does deserve the moniker amazing, James Randi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Max.
How are you, sir?
Thank you.
We would like you.
This is me? Thank you. Thank you. I don't think I need it, or do I?
No, we have two mics. One is for the cameras.
Okay.
This is so they can hear us.
You got me.
So if you have something that you would like the cameras to hear, but not them, do that.
Okay. Or this, yeah, whatever.
Very good to see you.
They never work with me. The batteries run out. Yes, thank you, Max. I haven't seen you. How many years has
It's
it been
been
now?
a bunch. I don't remember how many,
Yeah,
but
there
it's
you
got to
go.
be 5 years, 6, 7.
Oh,
something
we were
like
both
that, at
younger,
least
too.
that. Well, you barely changed.
Yes.
I was looking at some photographs of you from the 1950s. You have changed since then.
That's true.
But you hit a certain point, back around, I think, 1974, and you look exactly the same then as now. I don't know if this is evidence of, well, what is it evidence of?
Let me tell you a bit of a story in that. Now, you didn't ask, but I'm going to volunteer this. I work for colleges and universities all over the world, and I love the work. Now, when I'm doing that, I'm not doing a magic show. I do